Guys, what's up? It's been a minute since I made a video. Been a hot minute, to be honest. Just been trying to work and getting everything I've been wanting so far up to this point. Taking one step at a time. So tomorrow I will be getting the Corvette tuned, because I finally have long tube headers installed in that car. So just no tune at the moment. I'm going to get it tuned tomorrow afternoon. I'll probably make a video about that one whenever that's done. But yeah, I was like, I've driven it just a few times even without the tune. To me, just because obviously for you guys it's different to hear it, but to me that car is loud, like very loud. And for Corvettes, they're not, especially the C5, those things are not known to be very good for having like a sound deadening items. Like on those cars you can hear every little thing. Like for a stock exhaust, I think the C5, like between the Corvettes from C5 and on, the C5 is probably the quietest to me that I've ever seen. So that's the stock exhaust is not, at least on the base models. If you have a C5 Z06, at least just the axle back, that I think is probably the perfect OEM. Like OEM sound. Like it's not too loud, it's not too quiet. If you throw long tube headers to pair with it, it's kind of a perfect mix. Right now, you throw long tube headers with a base models, I'm sure it can still be pretty loud, and it's still manageable if you want to. If that's your plan, like where you can have like headers and all that, but you don't want to be stupid loud, that's fine. That's up to you. So you do what you want with your car. Now, that being said, now that we finally have this whole situation installed, right? I just want to mostly talk about like what should be some must-dos, right? Some must-do upgrades, especially for these cars. I'm gonna just go with the C5 just because, and probably the C6 just because they're very similar. But I'm gonna go mostly with the C5 just because obviously that's the car that I own, right? And I don't know how you drive your car, but these are my recommendations after I've owned this car for 2 years now, right? I've had it for over 2 years, and I'll say that at least for being in the southwest region of the states, like myself, I live in Arizona, right? So being down on this side of the states, it gets very hot, right? Now, and I'm going to talk about for anything that can at least help these cars cool off, because I always hear people talk about how these cars are known for overheating, this, that, and the other. I was like, and that's true, yeah, they do get hot. I saw that firsthand in terms of like the temperatures that I was seeing. I was like, this is not supposed to be a thing that most cars should see, but it's just what they have. I think the first one, and this one, I think you can kind of throw it to pretty much almost any state if you drive it far enough and if you drive it enough in general. If you barely drive it, then I'd say just leave it alone. But if you drive this car fairly enough, which I think you should, like these cars are great, right? The cars are meant to be driven. At least drive them, right? There's nothing special about Corvettes in terms of a collector's item. They're special for the reason for the money per performance. That's the whole reason of the car. You trying to make sure it has low mileage to put the value up and stuff of that matter. Like, it's just no, right? If you have like a ZR1, okay, maybe that one, right? That's like the only Corvette that I guess I could somewhat understand, like keeping the miles low, and even some Z06s. Like those ones I get. But anything else, like if you have the LS1, 2, or 3, if you have those engines powering your car, an LS6, if you have those 4 engines powering your Corvette, I think you should be able to drive that car more, because those are probably the perfect engines to drive those cars in, right? Like it's perfect. There's not much going on. And like, I mean, if you want to drive that C6 Z06, that's up to you. But besides all that, the cooling, I would say the first thing I would recommend, at least especially for people who live in the hotter zones of the United States, or just hot areas in general, right, is get a aluminum radiator. That's the one thing, because I'm like, those cooling temps get hot. They get really hot, regardless if you're in a stop and go traffic or not. And I saw that, at least especially for me, right? I would be on the highway, right? There was my first year of owning that car, I was on the highway, and that was the only car I had, and I was driving that car 900 miles a month, which is more than most Corvette owners will ever say, right? I dailied that car for over a year. All right, that was the only car I had. That was my primary daily, and that was from home to school back home, and that's a 46-mile trip total from those 2 places alone. And then I would have to go to work after school, right? And then whenever I'm not at school, I'm still working. I had something to do every single day. There was never really a day where I had not one or the other. I usually had one or the other, or both. That's usually the way my day went. And cooling temps, majority of the time, right? Unless it's like unbelievably cold outside, which happened only during like December. Like most of the states, it gets fairly cold in December. Even here for me, right? It got fairly, at least for me, it felt like it was pretty cold for the car, but it was fine. Right, the car still got up to temp and everything, but I would say get an aluminum radiator. But the thing is, and I always hear people say this, like, why don't you just replace or put a lower thermostat? To me, that's just more of a band-aid more than solving the actual problem with the car. Right? I'm like, you're just trying to hold off on, like, I know a radiator is expensive, especially an aluminum one. I bought one for my car from DeWitt's, but it works, right? The coolant temps will drop down. It's not going to be like super crazy where you drop 50 degrees, no, right? But it's going to be more manageable for the car. And especially if you're in constant motion, it's going to want to stay at a temp. For me, it wants to stay at about 200. Like, at least based off temperature gauge. It literally just stays at like 198 to 200 degrees. If I'm like, even if you try to give it some gas here and there, it's gonna go up to like 203, and then once you step back down to cruising speeds or cruising throttle, it just goes straight back down to 200. So like, instead of you seeing 220, 225, sometimes even 230, right? Like somewhere between that 220 plus range of coolant, which I don't like seeing, right? That's no. 200 is good for me. And then for the C5s, obviously most of them did not come with, at least mine didn't, right? Like this is like early, this is very early, late 90s, early 2000s. This is the beginning of OBD2 Corvettes. Most of them did not have like an external oil cooler, just specifically for engine oil. All right, if you had a Z51, I think there was a cooler for like power steering and whatnot. But I think for the case of just the engine oil, that one never really had one for that car. Right, that was more of a C6, C7, C8 type of thing. That's more those cars. C5, everything was kind of just a testing point. That was kind of the guinea pig of the Corvettes from once OBD2 started. That car basically was just a project car. They're just trying stuff. So I would say leave the thermostat alone is the way I would look at it. And if you do want to lower it, if you really just, want to do it, I would say the lowest you should go is 180. Do not go any lower than that, please. All right, let it be a 180. I I think I see 160 stats. I'm like, I just don't see any use for that. There's just no reason, right? Like, if you want to solve the actual issue with the car, I would say get an aluminum radiator. That'll help it a lot. If you want to leave, I'd prefer you leave the thermostat, just because at least that can still get the car up to temp, right? Once it gets up to its operating temp, which operating temp will still be somewhere between 200 and probably 215. That's the operating temp of C5s, and that's just the way it is for those cars. They just get hot, at least hotter than most cars, but that's what they do, right? But if you can at least reach operating temp, everything inside should be just fine, right? Oil clearances are at its best. Everything's getting lubricated properly. That's what you want. You want it to hit operating temp. You don't want it to stay 130 the whole time. You need it to get up to temp. So leave it at where it's at. Now, if you have let's say an automatic car, right? Which, I see a lot of people online like dog on people who get sports cars or muscle cars, etc. Especially Corvettes, especially that, who dog on them for getting the automatics. Which, yeah, they're not the greatest, right? Like C5s, you had the 4L60s, C6s, you had a 6L80, and obviously the C7, you had 8L90s for majority of the years. There was only 1 year where that car had a 6L80, and that was the first year the C7 came out. But, right, I'm not here to judge you, okay? That's your money. I say that's your money. You do what you want with it. You go ahead and have fun with the Corvette. Like, you don't have to be, a person that just wants to drive stick the whole time. Some people just don't want to do it, right? So you can have your opinion, but whether you like it or not, that's people's money. You can say, if you want other people to buy a manual Corvette so bad, go ahead and buy yourself one. That's the way I look at it, right? Now, if you have an automatic car, this is where it gets a little bit more expensive compared to the manual ones, right? Is for the automatics, those automatic transmissions get very hot. They just get hot. Those cars, keep in mind, they're bottom breathers for the most part, and the trans is in the back, so it takes a minute for anything to really cool off that transmission. It's not an instantaneous thing, and it's just the way they work, right? These transmissions, especially they're usually integrated with the radiators that they had, which the radiators are tiny. So if you have any of those three, let's go with, especially probably the easier one the easier of the three to deal with would probably be the 4L60s or the 6L80s. If you have those two out of the C5 and C6, I would also recommend on those ones getting a external like auxiliary trans cooler. Like get one from like True Cool or Mishimoto or whatever the case. Get a stacked one, or even if you don't want to get a stacked one, get a minor one. Now, on those cars, those ones obviously have a trans temp gauge, and they pretty much almost always will. The only difference is the fact that the accuracy of that gauge is not exactly up to par, right? Because it's going off of the sensor's pretty much in the pan. It's just in the pan. It's not seeing what's actually the actual internal temp of the trans, right? You're seeing what's getting pulled from the pan. Now, the way I see it for that, right, is if, let's say, you're seeing, and this also depends whether you're stop and go or whether you're moving a lot, but let's say just ballpark it, right? Ballpark, if you're in the city, stop and go, and you're not in like super fast motion, I would say add 40 degrees on top of what you're seeing. If you're on the highway, add somewhere of 20 to 25 degrees on top of what the gauge is saying, right? And those cars, since it's integrated in the cooler or in the OEM radiators, even if you get a DeWitt's, there is a fitting that you have to get for those ones, and it should be fitted into that cooler, into the radiator. But I would prefer you to get a separate one, right? Like, yeah, you could still run it through if you know how to do it right, you could get it to run through or in line with the radiators, which that's not a bad idea either, right? You can at least get that trans temp up to temp, so that's not a bad thing. But let's say you get an auxiliary cooler, or that if you get an external like standalone cooler, your trans will run way cooler, right? The temp might say 130, 140. Let's just take a guess at that. So like in reality, you're probably getting somewhere between 160, 180, which I think for almost most transmissions, that'd be the ideal spot, right? Now, I think the only reason why people say run it in line is because during winter times, at least in the southwest side, if you're anywhere in the colder areas, don't do it. Okay, just leave that'd be the only time I would say, if you have an automatic trans, get the fitting, get it to fit into, obviously integrate it into the radiator and let the car do its thing, right? Don't just leave it alone. The only time I would say get a separate cooler is if you live in the hotter side of the states, in the southwest side, or maybe even Florida, right? That's the only real side that's hot over there on the east side. Like you're like in Arizona, Death Valley, whatever the case is, I would say get a external cooler, just because it'll still run hot, right? So like if you get the cooler or standalone, the trans can at least hold itself off for way longer. All right. So that'd be the primary two, I would say, if you have an automatic trans. If you have a manual trans, I think you're pretty much set with just the radiator. To me, that's regardless of where you are. Because if you leave that stock thermostat, you will get up to operating temp almost every time. Pretty much every time. The car it won't open anything until 100. Like these thermostats are like 190. So I'm like, you're good. Okay, you're good. So I would say just get that. Now, if you want to do your other coolers and other things, that's great, right? But like I think in terms of if you have these cars, I think the most important thing isn't power mods, right? Unless you drive it rarely and you try to treat it as a special car where it's a once a month type thing. Like, no, okay, it's not. Like, you've got to drive these cars. So I would say like you just got to drive it, right? And if you want to really help these cars out, just cool it down. Just get the things to help get the whole overheating stigma out the way, right? Just get it out the way. Get that radiator. If you have an automatic car, get a trans cooler if you live down here. If not, then buy the fittings that are needed to fit it into the aluminum radiator, so you could at least run it in line with the car, right? That's the way I see it. So, but like I said, it's up to you. This is just from my experience and owning the car for the last 2 years, especially living in Arizona. So that's what I've seen. So what I've seen, and what I've seen some of my other either classmates at the time or friends or whatever the case is. Whether you have if you have a manual or automatic, I'd say get a radiator. If you have an automatic specifically, get a radiator with a trans cooler. Or if you don't want to deal with that, then just because that's obviously a little bit more expensive if you try to go that route. So if you just want to deal with just radiator, just be sure you get the right fittings for the DeWitt's radiators, because that's probably the best direct fit one that I've seen. It's probably the most expensive, but it does fit the car spot on. And that one, you probably have to just buy fittings. Not probably. I've looked through that whole list that they have. So you got to buy the fittings that specifically goes into those radiators, because if you have a trans cooler, or if you have the transmission fittings that are in the C5s and C6s, normally will not fit the ones that are going into the aluminum radiator. You have to get a brand new one. So, but just do anything to cool the car off, right? That's the way I look at it. And then if you want to complain about the automatics being kind of sluggish, obviously the best thing that most people say is get it tuned, right? Like you can get the autos tuned and they can be relatively quick for what they are. Like it's not gonna be dual clutch fast, but you know, you can at least get it tuned a little bit. So, but that's my opinion, okay? On these Corvettes specifically. I gotta head to work. Y'all have a great day. I'm out.